Thursday, April 29th afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Keelan, good afternoon. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty. Maps.
Here.
Rubio. Wheeler.
Here, under Portland City Code and State Law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, www.portlandoregon.gov/video, and channel 30. The public can also provide written testimony to the council by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, your flexibility, and your continued understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to conduct the city's business. We'll now hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at portlandoregon.gov/auditor contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the city council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record, but your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist, and if you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the electronic meeting. And please be aware that all council meetings are recorded.
Thank you. We have 2 items today. The first is item 293, please.
Accept the Portland Design Commission 2019-2020 State of the City Design Report.
Awesome. Commissioner Ryan, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure to introduce the 2019-2020 Portland Design Commission State of the City Design Report. First, I want to start off by thanking the dedicated volunteers who serve on the commission. It's so exciting that they're here today, many of them. This commission meets on Thursday afternoons, 2 to 3 times each month for many hours that go even beyond those meetings as they review land use cases and provide design advice. The dedicated group include Chair Julie Livingston, Vice Chair Sam Rodriguez, Don Ballister, Brian McCarter, and Jessica Molinar, Zari Santer, and Brian McCarter. Thank you all so much for your service. Today, this commission will be presenting their 8th report before the council, but they have been operating in the city of Portland since 1980, and they provide leadership, expertise on urban design and architecture, and on maintaining and enhancing Portland's historical and architectural heritage. This report comes to the council at an important time as we are reviewing the Design Overlay Zone Amendments, better known as DOZA, expanding design overlay districts and looking towards the economic recovery of our city across all of our neighborhoods. I'm like you, I'm looking forward to hearing more today from the commission members about their work. And with that, I am delighted to turn it over to Chair Julie Livingston to share the Portland Design Commission's 2019-2020 State of the City Design Report. Take it away, Julie.
So thank you so much, Commissioner Ryan. Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to Commissioner Maps and Mayor Wheeler. We are very glad to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for making time for us. All 7 commissioners are here today, and all will play a role in this 2019-2020 State of the City Design Report. We've put this report together with the intent of giving you insight into the city's design guidelines, the nature of the discussions between Design Commission applicants and members of the public, and the rationale that underlies our decisions. So even though you kindly introduced us, Commissioner Ryan, I am going to ask each commissioner to introduce themselves just so their voice is on the record. So let's please begin with Commissioner Santner.
Zeri Santner, I'm very pleased to be here. And I pass it on to Sam.
Sam Rodriguez, pleased to meet you too. Brian McCarter.
Brian McCarter, Design Commission, happy to be here. Chandra.
Chandra Robinson, Design Commissioner. We'll pass it on to Jessica.
Jessica Molinar, Design Commission, and passing it on to
Don.
Don.
Where did he go? He was here.
He was here.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. I'll read through the whole thing.
Don will return, and I am Julie Livingston. So we missed the opportunity to make a report in early 2020 because of the pandemic, but 2019 was a typically busy year with hearings scheduled on 2 out of every 3 Thursdays. We missed about 8 weeks of public hearings in the spring of 2020, but the spring was followed by a frenzied summer as we cleared the backlog of cases that had to wait for us to learn how to manage public hearings on Zoom. Now, though, we've worked through that backlog and it's been quiet for several months. That's not to say work doesn't continue. Commissioners have been engaged in important committee work on DOZA and the vertical infrastructure and the right-of-way project, in addition to briefings on a variety of topics. But it's slow, and even though development proposals are beginning to trickle in, our workload won't return to what it was before COVID-19 until the protests end and the plywood comes down and investor confidence returns. So now to the presentation. The purpose of design review is to promote design excellence in the built environment through the application of design guidelines that build on context, that contribute to a public realm, and that promote quality and long-term resilience in the face of changing demographics, climate, and economy. We, the Design Commission, we organize our conversations with applicants around these 3 tenets, and we are going to share 3 recent projects with you that explore these tenets and the guidelines they represent. We'll spend about 5 minutes on each, which means there's plenty of time for questions and discussion, and there's a built-in break at the end of every section, or we can save all of the Q&A for the end, whatever works for City Council. We would like to save the final 10 minutes to announce the 2019 and 2020 Design Excellence Award winners. The Design Commission gives this annual award to the architectural firm that delivers both a strong response to guidelines and outstanding architecture. And today, partners from the 2 firms receiving the awards are here for a few minutes of invited testimony. So I am going to screen share. I am the person who's going to push the slides forward today. Let me know when you see my screen, please.
Colleagues, while she's doing that, does anybody have any problems if we wait until the end of the presentation to do the Q&A? Is that okay with folks?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool, good.
And it looks good, Julie. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. So we are going to begin with a discussion of context with Commissioners Jessica Molinar and Chandra Robinson.
Thanks, Julie. Context. Context is really important because Portland has wonderfully distinctive neighborhoods. Sub-district guidelines and character statements developed with input from neighbors identify how Portlanders see the distinctive physical characteristics of a specific neighborhood. They are also how the Design Commission is able to evaluate a project, not just in how it meets the city's goals, but also in how it responds to the changing physical realities of a place, while still retaining a sense of being singular, identifiable, and special. Every new building has an impact on its context, and it is the Design Commission's challenge to interpret the context guidelines in a manner that respects the past, understands the present, and builds for the future. Next.
Here you can see an example of a poor response to context with the large image on the left and a good response to context with a large image on the right. At the top of the page, you can see buildings within the context of the examples. The example on the left ignores the pedestrian-oriented commercial context of its neighbors, does not provide an active ground floor, has limited openings and transparency, lacks weather protection for pedestrians, and is severely lacking in facade articulation. whereas the example on the right does a great job of taking its cues from buildings in the neighborhood. The scale of the massing, the materials, the facade articulation, and general sense of quality are all complementary to the fabric of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So when we talk about context, we think about it and consider it in regard to its potential future via zoning. We consider it at the neighborhood scale, the surrounding blocks, and the context that is immediately adjacent to the proposed development. Next slide, please. The proposed development we've selected to describe the process of reviewing context is the Pepsi blocks, which was approved in 2019 based on the community design guidelines. Among the criteria for approval is the development's ability to blend into the neighborhood. In this case, the development team chose to set the new buildings back from Sandy Boulevard and retain the existing pavilion. In doing so, they're retaining a neighborhood icon and maintaining a sense of place and neighborhood character, as well as providing a public amenity with the newly created plaza. Additional building height was awarded to balance the preservation of the pavilion with the impact of the new buildings. Next slide, please. Here's a closer view of the pavilion and plaza. Next slide, please.
All right. So what you're seeing here, again, is still about context. And you'll see a bunch of buildings below that are from the surrounding area, and then the image of the new development on top. And the new development, even though it's much larger in scale, has a singular material and punched openings. When I say punched openings, I mean those individual window openings, as opposed to like a connected horizontal ribbon of windows or an all glass facade like curtain wall. Those things would be much more common and appropriate like in the Lloyd district or downtown areas. So the expression of the material and texture in the new development really helps it blend into the existing context while still being clearly new. It's not trying to match the things exactly, just be similar and complementary. Next. So here what you see is that the development has retail use and publicly accessible open space on the ground floor, which is not very common in this neighborhood because it's mostly warehouses and small office buildings. And even though it's not common, it is desired as part of the future context in this area in order to create more activity on the street, have more eyes on the street, people will feel safer, and it would really make it a neighborhood destination and add a lot of activity. Next, please. So again, thinking about planned area character, what you're seeing here are residential units that are at grade level, and they incorporate porches and a vegetation screen that buffer those units from the street. And these are really meant to echo residential properties that are across the street, across Sandy, and provide some of that smaller scale residential into this super block and large scale development. Next, please. Then lastly, in context, what you see here again is that iconic pavilion and this large open plaza around it. So this new plaza that's created is a complement to the retail use on the ground floor, and it provides a place for new residents of the buildings to gather alongside the public in this privately owned space. It really will act as a public amenity as it's large, open, accessible, and pleasant, and it's very well connected to the public and private pedestrian circulation system.
Okay, we will move on to public realm. Before we do, Commissioner Ballister just sent me a text to let me know that he lost his internet connection and he is struggling to get it back. So Sam Rodriguez, I hope you have the notes.
What? I got it. He talked to me too.
All right.
Julie, I think I may be back on.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Glad you're here, Don. Okay, Public Realm is going to be presented by Commissioners Zeri Santner and Brian McCarter.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council, Zeri Santner. Appreciate being before you to talk about these very important subject matters. Brian MacArthur and I will cover the public realm, which includes sidewalks and all the publicly accessible outdoor spaces within a development. These are the most democratic spaces in any cities, and these are places for people where they come together, freely intermingle, socialize, and enjoy the variety of commercial and entertainment offerings provided by the adjacent development. Next, please. But first, we would like to illustrate a couple of examples of do's and don'ts of a successful or not so successful public realm. And Brian will start with don'ts.
Thanks, Zeri. On the left is one of my favorite projects in Portland, demonstrating how not to design public realm. As a matter of fact, I make sure I take anybody that's touring Portland to see our good examples, but to also see this, which I believe predated the Central City Design Guidelines. So you can see it's not a friendly environment at street level. It sits on a podium. There are blank walls. There are no awnings. There are no eyes on the street from adjacent businesses. The sidewalks are somewhat narrow because of the position of the building. So there's really very little there to really invite you to be in that space. The active part of the building is 30 feet up in the air. Zeri?
In contrast, the slide on the right demonstrates a well-designed public realm, which is welcoming, feels comfortable, supports the unobstructed movement of people of all abilities, while allowing for social interaction and contributes to the success of the adjacent commercial enterprises. Next, please. We've chosen the Oregon Square blocks 90 and 103 in the Lloyd District as an excellent demonstration of how a project successfully meets these very important guidelines. Next, please. The designers of this project have been skillful in using a unified set of design elements, such as the street furniture, trees, paving materials, and seatings, coupled with a consistency in their locations to create a sense of comfort, unobstructed movement, and continuity along the sidewalk. Also, the choices of trees, the extensive and variety of planting with active ground floor spaces work together to contribute to the vibrancy of the streets and the success of the adjacent commercial activity. Next, please. The design choice of developing a curbless, low-traffic street removes pedestrian obstacles and creates a barrier-free environment for people of all abilities. The deep furnishings and planting zone allows for a variety of pockets for resting and socializing. And the lush landscaping lends to a strong sense of continuity into other parts of the district. The designers chose ample spaces for layered and lush landscaping with large trees to create a safe buffer for pedestrians from vehicular traffic and privacy for people who are living or will be living in ground floor units. The combination of these design choices will lead to extending the well-designed existing pedestrian treatment of Northeast 8th Avenue another 2 blocks to the south. Next, please. The public realm guidelines also include the treatment of rooftops. This project's rooftops include outdoor amenities for the occupants of the buildings, taking advantage of the views of the city's skyline and the river beyond, while allowing them to cast watchful eyes on the streets and at the same time is respectful of the views of the neighboring buildings. Next, Brian will cover the additional guidelines included in this public realm.
Next slide, please. So somewhat as a measure of how important public realm guidelines are. They make up about, I think, 19 of the 32 total design guidelines in all the 3 tenets. So the same care that Zeri was describing going into the outdoor space, as you can see, the designers have also paid attention to the exterior of the building. You can see how there's a high degree of transparency at all levels of the building, looking out into the public spaces on the sidewalk, which makes people feel safer. You can also see the effort they made in the awning treatments that extend extensively around the 2 sides of the building to give people a place to stay out of the rain. You can also see even a treatment, a little bit different treatment at the corner of the building where the 2 glass planes actually butt together without any solid material. So you can imagine conference rooms, offices and things looking down, again, making this building feel very active at night. You can also see adjacent balconies, which help contribute to the importance of that corner. And then on the image on the right, we always like to look for how buildings compose outdoor space. The same space Zeri was describing with this extension of Northeast 8th to the south really allows these buildings to frame that space and really terminate it at the existing State of Oregon building. Next slide, please. Now, looking at the way the ground floor has been handled, one of the things we always look for is the height. The height of the ground floor is always greater than the upper floors of a building, and it's particularly important in commercial space. And what you can imagine here is over time, if the tenants in the buildings, say, perhaps change in 10 or 15 years, that is a facade that's easily adapted to new business. So let's say a restaurant comes and goes and a different one wants to take a different size space. It's very easy to adapt the ground floor of that building. Also, look at this slide on the right where conference rooms inside the buildings are connected to outdoor patios, which allow people, for instance, to step out of a meeting in a conference room, take a call, have a conversation with someone else. While they're doing that, they're making the outdoor space that Zeri described feel that much more comfortable. Again, spaces that have eyes on the space feel inviting and more comfortable. Next slide, please. And then getting down into a little bit of detail, we looked at the ways that this design team had integrated outdoor lighting in a variety of ways on the facade, tucked underneath benches, illuminating the background of colonnades. They really went to a lot of trouble to integrate light without glaring in your eyes, but making spaces feel welcoming, making them feel safe at night. Another thing we look for is how well signage is integrated into materials. Gas meters are not a sign that you want to necessarily shout out to the public, but we were struck by the way that they had integrated cut lettering into exterior high quality material, and they've done this throughout the signage through the building. This, I think, is a good segue into Dawn and Sam's next tenet, which is permanence and resilience. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Zeri and Brian. So yes, our third tenet, quality and resilience, is going to be presented by Don Vallister and Sam Rodriguez.
This is the third design tenet, and it covers our perceptions of the built environment. We all recognize quality when we see it, but creating something with this difficult to define characteristic comes from a thoughtful response to the ideas about quality embedded in Portland's various sets of design guidelines. These include 1, cohesive site and building design; 2, use of enduring building materials and design strategies; and 3, design work that promotes resilience, health, and environmental stewardship. Next slide. On your left is several examples of materials that are failing, but it's not necessarily that they are bad materials, but some are unfortunately exposed to weather conditions that are not conducive to longevity or a finish failure. The examples on your right are examples that have held up well over time, and it looks like they will continue to do so going into the future. Next slide, Sam.
Yeah, to illustrate this tenet, we chose Lincoln High School, which was a highly successful project that went through the design review process. Good design starts with good site design. A successful site design is responsive to current user needs, but also recognizes the user's needs in the future and the changes in time and demographic climate changes, as well as economic changes. Lincoln High School site plan, next slide. So this is obviously the location of Lincoln High School. It's a very large super block. So it was an interesting problem to solve, and part of this design team worked really hard with the neighborhood association, the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association, the Lincoln High School Task Force, as well as the Lincoln High School community to figure out what the best way to figure out the layout of the site. One of the major moves that they made was the continuation of 17th Avenue through the site, breaking the block up with high quality materials and, sorry.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
Really sorry, Sam. Didn't mean to kill your roll.
That's fine. And then as well as some interesting moves along Salmon Street by pushing the field back and allowing for a great exposure of trees and natural environment, giving back. There's a lot of, as you can see, mixing of public realm in this, but high quality site design and the preservation of heritage trees on the corner of 14th and Salmon. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Go ahead, Don.
Design for resiliency. Climate change is a reality that building design needs to respond to. The design team has elected to cover the entire roof surface that is not occupied by mechanical equipment with solar panels or vegetation. The solar panels will reduce ongoing energy costs as well as protect the roof surface from the sun's rays. Vegetating the roof reduces the heat island effect, helps manage stormwater, and provides wildlife habitat. Next slide. Design for coherency. The building shell encloses a diverse group of uses from a gym, auditorium, cafeteria, classrooms, library, etc., into a remarkably cohesive whole, while still allowing uses to be identified by window sizes and locations and massing moves. Circulation paths will successfully stitch internal building uses together and are clearly visible from the building exterior, which is an unusual feature of this building. Next slide, build active intersections. Normally, we would expect the main building entry to be on the corner to activate the intersection. However, locating the main vertical circulation system at the corner of Salmon and 18th Street is a really brilliant move. Students are exposed to natural light, the immediate environments adjacent to the school, and pedestrians in turn are entertained by an intermittent burst of activity as students change classes or head to the cafeteria, library, computer room, or other building or school rooms. The horizontal circulation path, next slide, which you see here is facing on the east side of the building and also is a prominent feature of the east side of the building, which makes this particular design fairly unique to have the circulation paths instead of buried in the center of the building, they're both exposed. Enduring materials, although brick is a common material used in the two institutional buildings across 18th Avenue, the design team elected to sheathe the building in a more modern material, fiber cement panels that have a proven history of durability. The selected brick color blends well with the nearby church and the Mac Club and gives the school its own distinctive character. Next slide, gateways. The new school, along with the similarly scaled new apartment buildings across Salmon Street, have created a new and very strong gateway to the downtown core. Previously, there was very little to indicate a change traveling from Leafy Hills to the dense west end of downtown. This project clearly delineates residential from predominantly commercial uses. Incorporate works of art. The mural at the termination of Main Street will be curated by RAC and both enriches the pedestrian experience on 18th Street as well as providing a focal point for pedestrians and motorists traveling down Main Street into the city core. In addition, it breaks up the long building massing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn and Sam. So now we'll move to the Design Excellence Award for 2019. This is actually a very ephemeral award. We don't have a plaque or a certificate or anything for the design team to take away. But since 2016, the Design Commission has made this annual award to the project that we think best accomplishes the 3 tenets of design, as well as really outstanding architecture. And the 2019 award is made to the DePaul Treatment Center and Holst Architecture. This building is in Gateway and is responding to the Gateway Regional Center design guidelines. And Dave Audie, partner with Holst, is here for a few minutes of invited testimony today. Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you, Commissioner Livingston. Greetings, Commissioners and Mayor. My name is Dave Audie, and I'm a principal and owner at Holst. It is my pleasure to be here today to testify about design review and the positive outcomes for our collaboration with our DePaul treatment centers. Our project for DePaul has a very challenging site. Located in Gateway, it is zoned for active commercial use, but located at the north end of the Adventist Medical Campus's sea of parking, to the east of Home Depot's back alley, and adjacent to a very car-centric Cherry Blossom Drive. Regarding the 3 core tenets of design review, context, public realm, and quality and resilience, we were challenged to deliver a design solution that responded to this fractured context with an enhanced and welcoming public realm while providing a resilient architecture with high quality detailing on a restricted budget. One of the keys to our success was our advanced engagement with BDS staff and the Design Commission, namely through the Design Advice Request process, otherwise known as the DAR. This early public meeting was essential for a few reasons. 1, it gave an opportunity for public input and transparent community engagement at the outset of the project before too many major design decisions had been made. 2, it was early enough in the design process that it allowed us to offer multiple options to BDS and the Design Commission on different ways to solve this problem, as opposed to only presenting one option. 3, it provided valuable feedback from the Design Commission that gave Holst the confidence to move forward with the direction, and it gave staff the assurance that there was buy-in to the overall concept. Projects like these are complicated. They require balancing a wide variety of constraints, from highly complex programmatic needs to regulatory requirements to needs of the neighborhood. Architecture like this cannot be regulated through standards alone. This level of design requires discussion, collaboration, and compromise. The DAR was essential to these elements of our success, and it simply made the project better. I want to thank our planner, Hannah Bryant, for her constant attention and dedication to this project's success at BDS. And I want to thank our Portland Design Commission for helping us think outside the box for the betterment of our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. And our 2020 Design Excellence Award is made to Jones Architecture and Vector Architecture for the Northbound 30 Collaborative. This is a proposal in Northwest Portland that is subject to the community design guidelines. And Alan Jones of Jones Architecture is here to present some testimony today. Alan, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Jones with Jones Architecture. It's an honor to accept the Design Excellence Award on behalf of Jones Architecture and Vector Architecture. For the NB30 collaborative project, we were fortunate to work with a visionary client, Noel Johnson and Karen Pacific. Noel and Karen Pacific originally conceived the idea of a pocket neighborhood consisting of small-scale buildings and townhomes in Northwest Portland along Highway 30 between the Industrial Sanctuary, Northwest Residential Area, and Forest Park. The original vision was to have 3 or 4 architecture teams work in tandem to develop a diverse, pedestrian-friendly neighborhood. Ultimately, Jones and Vector teams designed 4 buildings each, or 8 in total for the project. The collaboration and vision led to a very unique and creative scheme. The 8 lots were broken down into a checkerboard pattern with alternating arrangements of buildings and courtyards on each lot. The result was a cluster of nicely scaled buildings surrounded by active courtyards in which each of the lots or buildings relied on and benefited from the adjacent lot and development. Once this idea gelled, we realized that the scheme was definitely out of the box in terms of complying with the development standards. So we went through the process and applied for a pre-app and got initial feedback. And we were thrilled that staff immediately recognized the strength of the concept and helped us understand what the path might look like in terms of the process and modifications in order to pull off the proposed scheme. In hearings, the commission also recognized the strength of the concept and supported the direction. Once it became clear that the overall scheme was approvable, the nature of the first hearing shifted to a collaborative conversation centered around how to make the scheme as strong as possible, given that multiple standards had to be modified. It became a discussion about how to comply with the intent of the guidelines. Each of the commissioners had different points of view and things they were concerned about, and it all resulted in a much stronger project as a result of the process. I wanted to touch on a few of the guidelines that the project met in a strong way as a result of the process with staff and the commissioners. Context. As an edge condition between the Guilds Lake Industrial Sanctuary, the Northwest Neighborhood, and Forest Park, the contextual influence on the project was noteworthy. We had conversations with staff and commissioners regarding the appropriate character of the project and ultimately landed on a scheme that nicely stitched all of the influence together in an appropriate way. Public realm. Perhaps the most successful aspect of the project is the way the series of courtyards work together as a pedestrian network. Each of the 8 lots have courtyards. These courtyards are outdoor rooms for people to gather, stop, with nice landscaping, quality paving, and amenities. Furthermore, modifications approved regarding the vehicular access points for the project significantly reduced the impact of cars on the public realm. I also wanted to touch on aspects of quality and permanence and the resilience guidelines. Due to the early visioning and the design team's approach, we think that the project was strong in quality and permanence from the beginning. For example, the checkered board site plan, the visionary approach of having multiple design teams at the table, the use of mass timber, the use of brick, wood, and high quality metal cladding, the courtyards, the parking areas, all paved in high quality pavers that are evocative of European plazas. However, staff and commission did encourage and require the team to make changes to improve the aspects of the project's material, composition, and a greater degree of specificity in general. In summary, we support the design review process in Portland. In our experience, the projects that go through design review are far better as a result. The design review districts are by far the most livable in the city as a result of the rich pedestrian realms and the overall design quality of the built environment. The permanence and resilience of materials and the palettes in the design review districts are noticeably better. In its 40-year history, the design review process in Portland has made it the most livable, pedestrian-friendly, and well-designed city on the West Coast. In our opinion, regardless of the type and use of the project, all projects within districts should be held to the same high standards. We understand that it is a very difficult time and there's a lot of hardship and struggling in our city. That said, we believe in the long run an even application of regulations will prove to be the best policy. Please empower, enable staff and the commissioners to be confident modifying standards while upholding the intent of the guidelines. The same degree of flexibility on type 2 projects can be challenging. Please consider ways to empower staff to make decisions that are supported by the guidelines. Support the DAR process by allowing it to happen even earlier and with less preparation. Really use it as a means to get early feedback to teams and to the general public in order to improve understanding and eliminate misinformation. Once again, we are advocates of the DR staff, commissioners, and the process. The process has improved over the years, in our opinion, both in terms of the timelines We find that staff and commissioners are very well informed and experienced. We sincerely look forward to design review projects and are grateful to be able to work on projects in Portland with this talented group. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. All right, and thank you to City Council. So we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And senior planners Tim Herron and Hillary Adam from the Design Review and Historic Landmarks Review team are also here if you have questions for staff. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Fabulous, thank you. Colleagues, any questions at this particular juncture? If not, let me just jump in here and say how much I appreciate this presentation every year. I think this is, I can't remember if this is the 4th or the 5th time I've had the opportunity to hear this presentation, and it's always inspirational, and I appreciate so much the work that you do as volunteers. And I love the fact that you recognize great architecture that is representative of the kind of architecture that we'd like to see in our community. I had the opportunity, and Dave, I guess I'm speaking to you more than anybody at this moment, and the folks at Holst Architecture. I had the opportunity to go to the DePaul Treatment Center, to their Gateway facility, just a couple of weeks ago. And I was blown away. I was beyond impressed. Not only from the functionality perspective, obviously every single aspect of what a treatment facility should look like and how it should function and how the flow of things should be was very, very carefully and methodically considered. But just the cool architecture, you can't help. I sort of have this image of what a treatment facility would look like, a residential treatment facility. And the minute you see the building, and especially when you walk into that incredibly cathedral-like entry hall with the floor to ceiling glass, the view out onto an incredibly well thought out courtyard, you just go, wow. It looked almost like a 5-star hotel. As much as anything else. And then the rooms I thought were very thoughtfully designed and functional. And I loved the balconies and the way that outside activities and community space were blended into the overall concept. I just thought it was A+++. So I'm really, really glad that the commission is acknowledging that work. And I also want to shout out Jones Architecture and Northbound 30. What a fantastic project. And I appreciate that you're taking into account 2 very different types of architectural feats here, but both are remarkably excellent. I really want to appreciate the time that you're taking to acknowledge the good work in the community. But I also just want to take this time to acknowledge your good work and your thoughtfulness and the time commitment that you all put into this, several meetings a month for hours on end. What can I say? Bless you. Thank you for the great work you're doing. And thank you for making our community such a special place to live. Thank you. Commissioner Mapps, then Commissioner Ryan.
Like the mayor, I want to thank the committee for both their work and this really stellar presentation. Thanks to your work, I think I see and understand our city at a very different level. And that's been one of the deep personal transformations that I've undergone since I've been on this council. So it's a real pleasure every time we get to interact. If I were to pose one question today, it might be this, kind of looking to the future and maybe looking even at our present. How can design review help us adapt to some of the new economic realities and physical challenges that Portland is currently facing? I don't know who to send that to, but if anyone has any thoughts, I'd sure be interested in hearing that.
So that is a great question. Thank you very much for asking it. I'll start and then I'll hand off to Sam Rodriguez. Sam, I'm guessing that you have some thoughts about this as well. My view of design review, we've been doing this for more than 40 years, right? This is an institution in Portland that makes Portland the really great place that it is. And I so often have conversations with critics of design review who say, Portland's great, we don't need this. Just don't do this anymore. But the reason Portland is great is because we do this. And all of the residents of our city benefit from this process and also from the even-handed application of design review in all of our commercial centers and corridors, not just the central city, but all of the other commercial centers and corridors where it is now applicable. And this is a great leveler. This is a process that everyone can participate in. And this is a process that assures that all buildings, regardless of who lives in them, are well-designed buildings with a great public realm that are responding to the context and that are built well to last for a long time. So, that's kind of my view on it, is that we can't let this go because it is so incredibly important within the city and to everyone who lives in the city. And I'll hand off to Sam.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's great. It's a great question. I mean, there's always that balance that needs to be struck between efficiencies to get projects out, but at the same time the economics of projects, which the Design Commission really doesn't dive into, but that with the ultimate result. I mean, at the end of the day, all these three tenets that you heard about today are crucial for a successful building, a successful community, a successful block, a successful community, a successful city, as Commissioner Molinar mentioned, the different scales that we work in. And that level of care to how each building contributes through these tenants is crucial to bringing the city back to where it was and beyond, and to make it an equitable, fair, and a livable city that we all want to live in. So I think it's a crucial process, even though at times it gets maligned by it's another process we have to go through. But it's a process that, as a developer, and I work as a private developer as my day job. We appreciate the fact that the building next door is going to be just as good as my building and the building next to it and so forth. So that then it creates that fabric that we all want to live in and want to be a part of.
And Sam, you touched on this. There are no guidelines about money. There just aren't. Money's not part of the conversation. And there is no requirement around expensive materials. Every material is a good material. It's just a matter of how it's detailed and how it's applied.
Thank you, too, for that really rich response. And thanks to the whole committee for this really excellent presentation.
I'll go ahead and go. Yeah, first of all, I want to start off by acknowledging the award recipients. And I haven't been to the DePaul Treatment Center yet, but I look forward to visiting. And it was really refreshing to at least see that. I've seen it, I've driven by, and it really is an example of, I guess, in some examples you had where the context wasn't that great, and then you gave the poor example of making it worse, and then those that were complementing the context. This one seemed to upgrade the context of that area, and so anyway, hats off. I've been through my lived history, I've been around treatment centers, and it's so refreshing to see one that will have access to more people in addiction, in recovery, and such. That actually is pleasant. There's the famous examples of Betty Ford and others that are just so lovely. And it's, anyway, just really pleases me to see that. I also was taken with, I think it was you from Holt Architect, Dave, that said, the process is about discussion, collaboration, and then compromise. Were those the three that you mentioned? Or did I get that right?
Yes, Commissioner Ryan.
That was beautiful. I think the best government we have, and when we make tough decisions, we have a lot of discussion. We figure out how we can collaborate, and then we get to a place where we can compromise for the greater good of the population results. So anyway, it was wonderful to hear that example. And the other one that I think was mentioned by the other architect from Jones, Alan Jones, about the early feedback and how important it is on the front end to do a lot of work. And we keep hearing in the permit improvement process that we're undertaking here at the city with the multiple bureaus that are involved in permitting, that one early sign of improvement is how to lean in more and more to early collaboration with those in the permit process, so that it saves a lot of time and going forward down the road. So anyway, it was just great to see those two. Commissioners, is there any, I think the last thing I wanted to say, no, I'll wait until the close. I see that the other colleagues are here. Hello, Commissioner Hardesty and Rubio. So I'll get out of the way. I just want to acknowledge the two recipients of the awards.
Thanks, Commissioner Ryan. Commissioner Hardesty, then Commissioner Rubio.
Well, first I want to thank the Design Commission for your report. This is always an exciting opportunity for the City Council to see projects that have been completed, and not just completed, but now are a part of our broader community. I want to say to DePaul, Don, you and I was at a luncheon one day, and we just chatted about this effort. And it seems like it was just a couple of weeks ago, but I can acknowledge it was probably about almost 3 years ago. And now the project is completed. It is beautiful. It is exactly what you presented to the City Council as your vision for what you wanted to do on that space. And as a resident of Gateway, let me tell you how much I appreciate adding such a beautiful building to my community. And it gives me more proud. It makes me prouder to know that DePaul Treatment Center is as beautiful as it is, and that it will benefit my community for generations to come. So it's amazing. Sometimes it feels like it takes us forever to do things in the city, and then sometimes it feels like we did it as quickly as possible. For developers for people who develop it as their day job, you can tell me whether or not this was quick or not. But what I can tell you is that what I know is the care and passion that went into this work. I forgot the name of the other, absolutely the multitude of white buildings and the trees. I forgot the name of it, but oh my gosh, what an incredible creation that is, and how beautiful it is. And I may have missed the presentation about where that particular piece was located, but I'll be looking for it in the city of Portland. Thank you for the work that you do, you wonderful volunteers. Thank you for your passion for the city of Portland. And thank you for realizing that regardless of who is meant to be inside the building, whether they're low income people, whether they're people experiencing addiction, whether they are seniors, whether they are 20 somethings. I am so grateful to the Design Commission because it is clear in your work that you believe that beautiful design should be available and accessible to everyone. So thank you for what you've done. I look forward to next year's report and can't wait to see what else is coming down the pipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Rubio.
So I just want to also thank the members of the Design Commission for producing this report to council. I missed the beginning part, but I'm eager to watch it later today or tomorrow. But from the outside of the report, I just want to appreciate that it was also, constructed with the intent of providing more context on the work of the commission to the new council. That was also important to me too, to recognize. And as commissioner in charge of BPS, I recognize the very critical connection that our bureau has with BDS and the instrumental collaboration between the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the Design Commission as well. And 4 months into my first year in office, it's been very impressive to see your work in action. And even in the quasi-judicial appeals that we've experienced thus far, they've also highlighted the tremendous job that you as commissioners undertake. And we are so appreciative of your wisdom and your time and your service here. So I just want to say thank you for this. And I also look forward to continuing to work together. And I just have a question out of curiosity. How much time does your work that goes into your work, like in a project, just on any given project? I just want to get a sense of it because it's very evident you put a lot of time and care. and the quality of the work of evaluation is really great. So I'm just, as someone learning, would love to kind of get a sense of that. And also, how has COVID changed the work of the commission? Has it changed it in some ways, or is it the same?
Great questions. And I'll give you an answer. And if any design commissioners would like to contradict me, they are welcome to. A typical week with a typical caseload pre-COVID was, I would say, averaged between 12 and 16 hours for hearings and for prep for the hearings, and then additional committee work that happens outside of the caseload. So that's a fair amount. That said, we don't necessarily meet every week, and so it's great to have a break every once in a while. COVID was tough because we had no hearings for about 8, maybe 10 weeks. And so when we restarted in late May of 2020, there was an immense backlog, and everybody needed to get their project through today. And so we worked incredibly hard over the course of the summer, had meetings sometimes more than one day a week, and really long meetings to move everybody through the pipeline and get them to their approvals, and hopefully then keep all of those projects moving forward. Things dried up in the fall, and it's been really quiet since the fall. And our hope is that now projects are kind of starting to trickle in again, but we really need a lot more investor confidence for things to return to how they were pre-COVID. And Brian
Julie,
Carter.
I would add that there's parts of the Zoom process that have actually, in some ways, been almost better because things can be right up close to you on the screen. We can zoom in on things. And I'm one who likes to fiddle around in the background when somebody has an image up, and I can bring an image up, a precedent that we couldn't do before, but when we were in a live meeting. However, one thing I think I could say for all of my commissioners that we miss badly is those points when we were sitting around the half circle table and proponents would bring in a whole pile of materials, real brick, real glass, metal, all kinds of rich materials and real colors. And we could stand up and go over and look at those things, with your real eyes and not be looking at them on a computer screen. That part of it we badly miss, because when we get down to those decisions about, is this the right brick color with that metal? You can only go so far on a Zoom call. It's no substitute for really seeing the real materials.
Julie, can I add one thing as well? And that relates to how our working has changed since COVID. One aspect, a very important aspect of our work is the public's involvement through coming to commission meetings, talking about their concerns, their desires. And we've been just thrilled about how community cares about design. And then they have opinions. So we really absorb that. The Zoom has had advantages and disadvantages. More people are able to come and participate through Zoom, or at least watch us. But that interaction between the commission and the public is a little bit affected. So it's sort of a double-edged sword there.
So I see that we're at 2:59, and I think that the Historic Landmarks Commission is right behind us at 3 o'clock.
Commissioner Ryan will entertain a motion.
Yes, I move that we accept the Portland Design Commission's 2019-2020 State of the City Design Report.
Second.
And was that Commissioner seconded?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, Commissioner Hardesty / Maps. Both right on time. Commissioner Ryan moves the report, and we'll give it to Commissioner Maps seconds the report. Any further discussion? Please call the roll, Keelan.
Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Julie Livingston, for that, for leading us through that wonderful report. And it was great to meet with you earlier in the week. Commissioner Rubio, I was asking questions about time as well, because it was so clear in our briefing meeting how passionate everyone is, and how excited they were to do this work. And then it hit me that you were volunteers and just how many hours you were putting in. So it was not lost on me. And I really, again, thank you for the award recipients for coming. It was so great to have those vivid stories to be told. And I also want to acknowledge the BDS staff. It's great to see you again, Tim, and the people from the other bureau that we partner with, of course, BPS. And it's just a great collaboration. So thanks again for your dedication to our city. We're a much stronger city because of all of your service. I vote aye.
Hardesty.
Thank you once again for a very exciting report. And that says something when a report is exciting at City Council. I'm greatly appreciative for your hard work, your volunteer efforts. And Julie Livingston, it's such a pleasure to see you. You have been just providing so much of your soul to the city of Portland for so long. And I am so grateful that you continue to be an inspiration to so many people in the city. So thank you. I vote aye.
And I just want to echo my colleagues in thanking the Commission for your work and this excellent presentation. I'd also like to extend my congratulations to the award winners today. And on behalf of all Portlanders, I just want to thank all of you for making Portland the city that we love so much. It would be a much different place if it weren't for you and the work of this commission. And that is why I vote aye.
Rubio.
I just want to also echo my colleagues in appreciation, and also for all your tremendous work, the countless hours you put in. It truly is remarkable, and it definitely shows your commitment to making our city the place that it is. I also want to appreciate the award recipients for their great work and congratulate them as well. So very happy to vote aye.
Wheeler.
I vote aye. The report is accepted. Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. We'll look forward to more of the same. You set the bar a little higher every year, so well done. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have time certain item 294, please.
Accept the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission 2020 State of the City Preservation Report.
Commissioner Ryan. Mute.
I always want to get through a meeting without being told I'm muted. Hello, colleagues. It's now my pleasure to introduce the 2020 Portland Historic Landmarks Commission's State of the City Preservation Report. First, I'd like to thank the dedicated volunteers who serve on this commission. They meet on Mondays twice a month to review land use cases and provide design advice. They also provide advice to other agencies and bureaus. This dedicated group includes Krista Miner, the chair, Maya Fote, the vice chair, Matthew Roman, Ernesta Fuenmayor, and Andrew Smith, and Kimberly Moreland. Thank you, all of you, for your service. This commission has been providing leadership and expertise on maintaining and enhancing our historic and architectural heritage and protecting buildings and other properties that have historic and cultural significance since 1968. Today, the current commission will be presenting their 13th report before the council. This report comes to the council at a time when questions of representation, what we value, and whose history we honor is at the forefront of our civic discourse. On top of that, we are faced with the continued pressures of housing affordability and climate change. Our historic resources, both those identified and those yet to be identified, connect us with our past, let us plan responsibly for the future, and help us learn more about who we are as a collective. The updates to city regulations for historic resources are making their ways to the City Council over the next few months, and we ensure that Historic Resources Program works for all members of our community. I look forward to hearing, and I know we all do, from the commission's members who are here and the invited guests. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair Miner, to introduce this Historic Landmarks Commission's 2020 State of the City Preservation Report. Thanks for being here. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Ryan. And I'll start screen sharing in a moment, but I just wanted to appreciate for a second seeing everybody's faces here together. Honestly, I'm so appreciative of the time that you all take as elected officials just to kind of hear and check in with all of the aspects of running the city. You know, in this time, especially where it's just emergency after emergency, you know, you could just sort of prioritize, but you don't do that. You make time for everything. And I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you all. And for the Landmarks Commission, of course, this is our chance to meet you face to face, and I guess kind of, you know, tell you what's going on and who we are. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. Here we are. Okay, and is that visible for everyone?
Yes,
Great.
looks good.
Okay. So the image that we chose at this initial slide is of the Burnside Bridge, of course, with a racial justice demonstration in honor of George Floyd. And we chose it because this is such an important image. It captures some of the intensity of this past year and reminds us that history is actually happening all the time. The Burnside Bridge, of course, may not be around, at least in this, in its current state, in years to come. But as I began flipping through slides, I just wanted to remind my commission and also our invited testifiers to go ahead and speak up, to give me a cue to, you know, to change the next slide, because I may not be able to see you, but I can hear you. So I'll start with just a brief introduction to who we are. There are 6 of us current commissioners, and we are hoping to fill 1 vacant slot pretty soon. You'll be seeing each of us in turn, so I'll let each person really introduce themselves with their little part of this whole presentation. Oh, the only exception is, unfortunately, Ernestina Fuenmayor. She unfortunately could not join us today due to events beyond her control. But I wanted to acknowledge also the service of 2 commissioners, the smiling faces on the very right-hand lower end of the screen, who served part of or all of this past year, Annie Mahoney and Derek Spears. And then I also wanted to extend gratitude to Hillary Adam, who is the BDS staff to our commission, Cara Fioravanti, who's in charge of the design and the historic BDS team, and also to Brandon Spencer Hartle, who is our liaison at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. These people work incredibly hard to prepare us and as well as to do the city's work. Let's see, so that's the who, and then I'll briefly kind of tell you what we do. In a normal year, the bulk of our work is really land use cases. And so we see type 3 cases, which can be new construction in historic districts, typically using guidelines made for that district, or type 3s that are alterations to a designated building, if it's really major work being done. Then we also see type 2s on appeals. You know, staff make those decisions, but we're the appeal body for any historic review. And then type 4 recommendations to you for demolition reviews. We also provide design advice, just like the Design Commission does, for early stages of a project, and legislative advice to City Council and to the Planning Commission regarding code projects. And then in historic districts, we see guidelines for those districts being updated or developed every so often, and we make recommendations to you for those guidelines as well. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we end up doing. And we're a resource for other agencies and bureaus and officials. And I hope that we can serve you as a resource as well. And that includes things like briefings, advocacy, outreach, and etc. So our presentation today is really largely taken from our report. And I hope you've all had a chance to at least skim through it, because we're not going to cover all of it, of course, in our presentation in front of you today. There are a good handful of projects in that report that I hope that you get familiar with a little bit, that the Commission approved this past year. We're really excited to see these start to go up in various parts of the city. But for this presentation, we're going to start with our overall goals and priorities, kind of, you know, the underpinnings of why we do what we do. The first of these is preservation justice. Just the idea that as a city, we have to work to uplift and honor places that were and are still important to underrepresented groups. I think we can all agree that there has been too much focus on white history, and there's been too much erasure. The next major priority is really sustainability and resilience. There are more and more studies every year that highlight the importance of doing things differently in the construction sector. Reusing and retrofitting buildings is part of historic preservation. And the Landmarks Commission sees opportunities, good jobs and benefits to many communities, as well as for the planet through historic preservation. And then finally, affordability. That the idea is that most older residential buildings, even after retrofit, are often inherently less expensive. And we call that, you know, naturally occurring affordable housing. But it's also important to remember that designation of these older residential apartment buildings allows access to a major source of funding, which is historic tax credits. But designation also protects them from demolition. And Kim, go ahead and tell me.
Good afternoon. Yes, thank you, Christine. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, City Council members and members of the Design Commission, and also greetings to staff and others. My name is Kimberly Moreland, and I'm one of the new Landmark Commissioners, as you know. Today, I would like to discuss the Portland Historic Landmark Commission third priority, which is the preservation justice, which is really at the heart of a lot of the community efforts that I've been involved in through other organizations and now my business. Preservation justice priority directly aligns with several comprehensive plan policies, including policy 4.53, which is preservation equity, policy 4.54, which is cultural diversity, and policy 4.55, which is cultural and social significance. The recently approved Portland African American Multiple Property Document, or MPD, was a major step forward to expanding historic preservation efforts in areas with high concentration of underserved and underrepresented people. The MPD opened the door for additional individual nominations, including the Billy Webb Elk Lodge, which is to your upper right on your screen. And this special nominations provide financial incentives for the property owners as well. So there's financial benefits as well as having the sense of pride of being a National Registered property. And I would like to thank the City of Portland and Brandon Spencer Harder for leading the way in their current effort to nominate Dean's Beauty and Barbershop, Golden West Hotel, and Mount Olivet Baptist Church, which is one of the 3 early Black churches in Portland. And those properties are displayed on the screen. I believe that the broader community recognizes the importance of preserving the heritage of groups that have not benefited from past historic preservation efforts. Numerous public art murals, heritage markers, and monuments have been installed recently that memorialize people, places, and events that are important to their community. The recent installation of York, which I believe has been taken down, but at Mount Tabor, there's also Multnomah County recently approved the installation, a future installation of a historic marker that honors entrepreneurs and abolitionists, Abner Hunt and Lydia Sitner Francis. And these 2 projects, and among others, demonstrate the desire by our community to acknowledge the historical contributions of communities, especially African Americans and other people of color. And in closing, I would just like to say, I recently read a quote that says, anti-racism work is not transactional. It's not about checking the box. And I believe it's the same with preservation justice. It's not about listing a bunch of properties that have significance to people of color, but it's about building relationships. It's about engaging with the community and their history. It's about understanding why historic preservation is not just an elitist tool. It's recognizing that many of us who grew up in older homes because we were forced to live in areas with high inventory of affordable housing, respect and love historic features and homes that have unique historic character. But I hope that my work with the Historic Landmark Commission can help acknowledge that the past harms, but also engage more with the community that's been impacted or not benefited from historic preservation. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Andrew Smith. I've been serving on Landmarks Commission for a little over 2 years now. And as Kristen mentioned before, the Landmarks Commission has regularly underscored the vital role that preservation plays in sustainable development and combating climate change. Not only does preserving existing buildings, retain our architectural and cultural heritage, but it also has the added benefit of diverting tons of construction waste from landfills and retaining embodied energy that was spent in the construction of those buildings to begin with, which in turn combats climate change. Even though sustainable building technologies are advancing at a rapid pace, when you calculate the energy savings of a highly sustainable new building compared to a baseline building, it takes on average 38 years for the energy savings to outweigh the embodied energy that was spent to mine, manufacture, deliver, and assemble that building's component parts. And an AIA call to action in 2018 outlined 4 strategies for the construction industry to respond to climate change. Of those 4, adapt and retrofit existing buildings was the foundational strategy. We all need to push the construction industry to change, and creating incentives for retaining and retrofitting existing buildings, whether those incentives are financial or whether they're done through city, changes to city code, will literally better meet every single one of the comp plan guiding principles.
All right, Kristen, next. So the push towards sustainability has been happening for the past 25 or 30 years, as we're all aware. The topic of resilience, though, is just starting to come into focus, particularly here in the West, where our primary concerns are earthquakes and wildfires. And we all know how perilously close we came last summer and fall to wildfires that are creeping ever closer to the city limits. Unreinforced masonry buildings, URMs, represent the highest risk in the city to a Cascadia subduction zone seismic event. The building that you saw on the previous slide was the Alco Apartments building, which is at the corner of Northeast MLK Jr. and Cooch. And it was recently converted. Maybe some of you have visited it or had a drink or a dinner at the restaurant, but it was recently converted into an Icelandic hostel using federal historic tax credits. And of the total development cost of about $7 million, the historic tax credits amounted to almost $2 million, which was nearly enough to pay for the entire full building seismic retrofit. Of course, not all URMs need to be fully retrofitted as the Alco Apartments were. There are much smaller scale things that can be done to URMs to actually make them safe for the public. And Commissioner Foti will touch on some of those a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay. Maya? Uh-oh. No, are we having a...
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Good. There you are. Woo!
Sorry. I'm the one with the technology issues, sorry. Anyway, hopefully that's it. Anyway, thank you for having us, Mayor Wheeler, and it's nice to meet the new commissioners, and greetings. Returning commissioner, my name is Maya Foti. I'm the vice chair and in my 4th year on the commission, so I'm excited to be here. I'm going to touch on the affordability issue and to sort of call out that the provision of affordable housing and the goals of historic preservation are complementary. Recent studies have shown that older builders with historic buildings contain, and I'm reading this directly from our report because I thought it was pretty important, a greater proportion of immigrants, people new to the city from other parts of the country, same-sex households, women and minority-owned businesses, 75% more people of color. They're also more likely to contain unsubsidized, naturally affordable housing, exhibit income integration, and house a greater density of jobs in small and new businesses. Additional studies have concluded that private development in Portland is targeting undesignated historic areas for redevelopment and thus triggering existing population displacement and steep increases in housing prices, an impact the city first sought to identify in 2013. One study of the Beaumont, Wilshire area, which is pictured here so you can sort of see geographically where that falls, found that 34 demolitions in that neighborhood resulted in an average replacement house cost that was 149% larger and cost 148% more than the original demolished house. Another study found that the city's conservation district, for instance, demolitions are occurring at a rate commensurate with the surrounding areas. Not surprisingly, in Woodlawn alone, the U.S. Census revealed that 915 Black residents left the community between 2000 and 2010 and replaced by 840 white residents. The housing policies as they are currently failing the inner city minority populations. There are success stories happening all the time, however. One of them is, you can see the red circle. It's a project that we reviewed recently. It's close to the Laurelhurst neighborhood. If you could go to the next slide, Kristen. Is the conversion of the 1919 Anna Lewis Man's house, old people's home, into 88 units of affordable housing near the Laurelhurst neighborhood. And this is an image, obviously. The project has been widely supported by both neighborhood residents and housing advocates. It was a really great project to review. With so many city-led initiatives like RIP, DOZA, Better Housing by Design, all of which in some form encourage building reuse and densification, we encourage City Council to consider how historic preservation can bolster these initiatives. The Historic Resources Code project will update how we define and designate historic properties in the city. So it's a critical time where we must be mindful of where we and how we encourage demolition and development. Thank you. And with that, I will pass it on to Matthew Roman.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Maya. And thank you, City Council, for making time for us on your agenda today with so much going on in the city. But preservation is an equally important topic, I think, of your attention, so thank you. I'm here to advocate for adoption of the Historic Resource Code project and also for funding for the Historic Resource Inventory. Until 2017, the state of Oregon relied on the federal government's National Register of Historic Places list of district sites, buildings, and structures to determine what was worthy of preservation for historical significance. This program was established under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 and sets criteria which resources are listed nationally. Changes to the state law in 2017 decoupled Oregon from this federal system and required local communities to set their own standards. The Historic Resource Code project is Portland's response to these changes. Adopting the HRCP brings Portland in compliance with the changes to the state law, but more importantly, gives local control over how resources are identified and what level of protection they should receive. Updating the HRCP allows updates to the Historic Resource Inventory without relying on the National Register of Historic Places process. Adopting the HRCP helps the City of Portland catch up with other major cities who have long recognized the equity gap in cultural preservation. Like any resource, Portland's inventory of historic places is limited. Previous planning practices, redlining, urban renewal, infrastructure projects, and natural disasters have all affected minority populations disproportionately. Subsequently, we have fewer resources left telling the stories of these communities. Next slide, please. We also have invested less than we should in maintaining and protecting minority-owned historic properties. For over a decade, previous landmark commissions have advocated for funding to initiate a new citywide survey like that recently conducted in Los Angeles, California. We recognize funding for a project of that scale is not in the near future in Portland. If small steps are all we can make in terms of progress, consider funding limited areas which will have the greatest impact on the most endangered heritage we have. Like the recent neighborhood survey in Montevilla, other neighborhoods could be targeted where the potential loss of heritage would be devastating. Funding the HRI is a step towards correcting injustice of the past by making a public investment to ensure all our cultural heritage is considered, not just those with money and power. Funding the HR meets Comp Plan Goal 4.27, protect defining features. Protect and enhance defining places and features of centers and corridors, including landmarks, natural features, and historic and cultural resources through the application of zoning, incentive programs, and regulatory tools. Funding HRI meets Comp Plan Goal 4.28, historic buildings and centers and corridors, identify, protect, and encourage the use and rehabilitation of historic resources in centers and corridors. Funding the HRI is about mapping a vision for the future of Portland. We cannot know the impact of our planning decisions on diverse communities without a proper survey of cultural heritage resources. Funding the HRI ensures diverse communities see themselves in the history of the places that are preserved. Those places are a physical manifestation of the histories of many generations of immigrants and Indigenous people who have always been here. Thank you in advance for your support of this important work, and I will pass it on to Chair Miner.
Thank you, Matthew. And again, I wish you could see the other commissioner here, Ernestina Fuenmayor. I'm speaking in her place right now. Another action item that the commission is advocating for today is the creation of a cultural heritage plan for Portland. Our commission doesn't have much capacity to be proactive. Yes, we can advocate, we can provide recommendations or testimony to other bodies or commissions, but we are set up to basically react to, specific proposals or designations that come to us. Perhaps that is as it should be, but we also want accountability for the goals and policies of the comp plan. We strongly believe that a cultural heritage plan will not only set up a hierarchy of preservation policy, but will assign responsibility and a very minimal but ongoing budget to start to fill in the missing gaps for cultural representation and acknowledgement of past harms by the city. We propose that a cultural heritage plan would focus on identifying and designating historic resources important to underserved and under-recognized communities. It's so critical that this work happens in a transparent way, and also that work be led by those communities specifically, and have those communities collaborate with the city. Despite all of the comp plan policies that encourage it, around engagement and preservation of places across the whole spectrum of Portlanders, there is not now a process or any accountability for achieving any of these goals. The other thing I wanted to mention here is Legacy Business Program. And that was initiated down in the Bay Area and is now in a few other cities. And it's about the idea that communities are not just anchored by physical buildings, that really communities are anchored by people and businesses. The program recognizes living, changing enterprises as places that keep communities together. And eventually that can come with grants or loans, but the initial stages are often just recognition and celebration of the role that long-term businesses play in a community. Maya, it's you again.
Okay, back to the URM. And URM funding and our watch list. Essentially, we do have Old Blanchet House, which is slated for demolition. There are about 1,600 unreinforced or URM buildings in the city of Portland, Old Blanchet House being one. And another example is Central City's Concerns Medford Hotel, which is 81 single occupancy units. These buildings, and these are just a couple examples, contain businesses, churches, housing, offices, critical uses in the city, and they're full of people, and there will be an earthquake. The URM issue is complicated with no straightforward answers. Efforts to find a resolution have been stalled with much more pressing concerns the city has faced this past year. But the problem is not going away, and much can be done while we wait. 2 landmark commissioners were on the panel that the city created. We volunteered to study the URM issue in 2019. And in addition to finding cost-effective strengthening schemes and a way to help owners pay for them, another key issue was the importance of updating and clarifying the URM inventory so it becomes an effective tool as part of this effort. In our State of Preservation report, we highlighted a project that the state of Washington carried out in a similar effort for you to read. We encourage City Council to keep moving this effort forward, such as directing bureaus to apply for grants specifically earmarked for disaster mitigation. Retaining this product expertise is critical to the city's infrastructure and can also become an exciting opportunity for investment in our existing neighborhoods. And then back to Kristen Weiner.
Thank you. So we do have 2 projects to highlight for you today, and those are our award winners. Every year we pick a couple of projects, one a new construction and one a renovation. So it's often hard to pick. I mean, I want to make sure that you all know that, but each one that we do pick, we we want to highlight some qualities to really focus on and appreciate. The rehabilitation project of the year, Multnomah County Courthouse, is an example of a team finding a new use for a building that has been it's just a massive downtown presence for so long. And while the exterior changes will be pretty limited, you will notice new entries, better engagement with the street, and a few other pretty minor alterations, whereas inside, the alterations are quite extensive. So I will go ahead and introduce, although I'm going to hold off, we still have a few more slides, but the first speaker that you'll hear from today is Augustine Enriquez, GBD Architects, and he will be telling you a little bit more about this project. And he will be followed, by the way, by Joanne Lay, Dow Architects. And the new build project of the year is Dow Architects Unicorn Bed Apartments. And as the winner of the new construction category, we wanted to highlight the incredible thoughtful analysis of the Alphabet District and the site. The Unicorn Bed project was developed also with many thoughtful details and layout. So this isn't really a super flashy project, but it will house its target audience, which is single parents and kids, in an attractive and compatible building that anyone would be proud to live in. So the second speaker will be Joanne to tell you a little bit more about this project. And here I think I will conclude the landmarks presentation. And unless the City Council has any questions now for us, what we might do is perhaps I'll just go ahead and introduce the three final invited testifiers we have with us today. Mayor Wheeler, do you have any questions now?
I'm not seeing any questions right now, so why don't we go ahead and hear about the awardees? That'll be great.
Wonderful. Okay, so just to finish my introductions, after Augustine and Joanne, we'll have Jen Sohm from Portland Public Schools to talk a little bit about Benson High School, and then Geronimo Roldan, who is a student finishing his master's degree in historic preservation at the University of Oregon. And finally, Clark Brockman from Sarah Architects, who I asked to tell us a little bit about his work in adaptive reuse. And the primary project he'll be discussing isn't even a historically designated project in any way, but it is a preservation project and a great example of kind of one end of the scale of a renovation. As a city, we do have the opportunity to explore regulations around keeping what we have and making it work better, a goal that is part of historic preservation. So Augustine, please take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Augustine Enriquez V, a principal and director with GBD Architects. And thank you for the opportunity to address the council regarding the renovation and repurposing of the historic Multnomah County Courthouse. Next slide, please. The building was constructed in two phases. First phase was in 1909, second phase followed in 1914. And it's an important building for our community as it is both a local landmark listed in Portland's Historic Resource Inventory, and it is also individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The goal of the renovation is to repurpose a building from a government-owned courthouse into a unique and commercially viable building with well-preserved historic features. A range and combination of uses is anticipated for the building, including office, new restaurant space, and new event space. Along with cleaning the exterior of the building, significant historic building elements that will be retained include the east entry lobby, the interconnecting grand stair, and the 4 historic double height courtrooms. Additionally, the building will undergo a seismic upgrade to ensure it survives another century of service to our community. Next slide, please. And here you can see the existing courtyard in the center. That's important because the 3 design goals that the county courthouse renovation that were highlighted by the Historic Landmark Commission during our hearings were a full seismic upgrade, providing better accessibility of the building for pedestrians, and respecting the historic details and materials of the building. Next slide, please. And seismic upgrades are tricky in historic buildings as they can be very destructive to historic material. In the case of the county courthouse, the internal courtyard was hugely valuable in being able to provide a space to insert new structure, new elevators, and new mechanical systems. Those are the teal elements you see in those drawings. Next slide, please. The building as it exists currently is formidable at the pedestrian level. This is a plan, but it's demonstrating that the stone base has very few minimal windows as you walk around the building. And though it occupies a full city block, there are currently only a few ways into the building for pedestrians. A key design solution for the county courthouse was reintroducing more access to the building at grade. You can see on this slide, there's just really no doors or windows at grade. If we go to the next slide, we're able to introduce more access at the building at grade. Historic entries that were removed over time are being reintroduced along Southwest Main, as seen here, and along Southwest 5th. If we go to the next slide, you can see this is Southwest 5th, and the next slide would be the new entry for a new event center, which is really dramatic. This has been stoned over, if you can believe it, over time. There was this really incredible entry there, was put stone, so it's closed. So to close, repurposing historic buildings from one use, a courthouse, to another, commercial office, is a balancing act. There are local, state, national guidelines to meet, and they can be in conflict at times. There are also design goals that are desired by governing agencies like the Historic Landmark Commission that need to be balanced with the needs of the property owner for commercial viability. In GBD's experience, with this project, as well as another in the historic Skidmore Old Town District, the Historic Landmark Commission and city staff have been receptive to an iterative dialogue of finding a balanced design solution, one that works for the community's interest as well as the property owner. And broadly speaking, my experience as an architect practicing in Portland with the Historic Landmark Review has been a positive one.
Thank you. Dow Architects.
Hello.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi. Hey, Kristen. Thanks, Kristen. So again, I'm Joanne Lay, founding principal of Dow Architecture. And on behalf of our team, we thank the Landmarks Commission and City Council for this recognition. The project's namesake is inspired by 2 enlightened sponsors, the unicorn property owner, Deb Sposito, and Kevin Cavanaugh of Gorilla Development. Their vision was to provide 13 extremely affordable apartments with a focus on single moms in the heart of Portland's Alphabet Historic District. Next slide, please. The neighboring fabric is a mix of sizes and styles of buildings connected by a framework of outdoor spaces, gardens, and courtyards. Next. Porches and balconies further blend inside and outside, creating a pedestrian-friendly and very livable environment. This is the context and the character we've designed this project to fit into. Next, please. The offset 2 building layout forms small courtyards for each building around a shared stairwell. These courtyards allow for air, light, and views on all sides of the very compact units. Next, please. And the building massing mediates between the larger apartment building to the west and the smaller house to the east. In the case of this project, the commission agreed with this assessment. that the essence of the Alphabet District is its diverse mix of buildings, scales, and styles, connected by its leafy, the network of leafy courtyards and gardens. So how the buildings connect to these outdoor rooms embodies the spirit of the district and brings the human scale to the neighborhood streetscape. Next, please. So taking inspiration from historic balconies, the building's exit stairs are transformed into garden balconies in a bay window shape, encouraging socializing and connection to the courtyards. Next, please. The railings are laser cut steel with organic motifs, providing character and whimsy for the kids, as well as the adults who live here. So our office does primarily modern architecture. We design foremost for the livability of the building's inhabitants, while considering the nature of the site and the broader neighborhood context. Our projects have very frugal budgets. It's not economical or appropriate to mimic historic detailing, so we use today's tools and technology instead to capture the spirit of this character. That landmarks can recognize this project as being able to fit seamlessly into this historic district speaks to their expertise and understanding that cities are evolutionary environments. Fitting into a district is usually a matter of scale, proportion, relationship, buildings, outdoor spaces, and sensitivity to the street. Architecture is part of this continuum, and modern buildings can be compatible in a historic district. The unicorn bed demonstrates equity and a richness that makes great and diverse neighborhoods. It sends a message that, everyone deserves a dignified place to live, and that families have access to a nearby park, school, grocery store, and other amenities to be part of the community, and where they can also contribute to the ongoing story and history of a neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, Jen Sohm, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Sohm, and I'm a project manager with Portland Public Schools Office of School Modernization. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon joining you to talk briefly about the modernization of Benson Polytechnic High School and specifically testify to the benefits and the value of the Landmark Commission's review and oversight. Starting in 2016, during the Benson Tech's master planning phases, we've fostered a strong relationship with the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission, and we've benefited from their leadership and expertise on maintaining and enhancing Benson's historic and architectural heritage. Benson Polytechnic High School is a Portland designated historic landmark, and at over 100 years old, it's in need of full modernization to address a number of deficiencies. These include containing URM, needing a full seismic retrofit, ADA, health and safety upgrades, and teaching and learning updates as well. Next slide, please. Benson Polytechnic High School is a one-of-a-kind 4-year career technical education focused PPS high school with over 100 years of providing industrial arts to students citywide. Benson Tech provides a number of rich and engaging hands-on learning environments and course offerings. These include automotive, applied arts, construction, electrical, engineering, digital media, radio broadcasting, manufacturing, computer engineering, dental, medical, and nursing. Students gain valuable real-world experiences such as building a house, welding and manufacturing, car repair, screening for diabetes, and designing compelling graphics and websites. Next slide, please. I'll highlight some of the design progression elements which were real positive design attributes that resulted from the the Historic Landmarks Commission consultation and reviews. This is the street level front view of the iconic facade. Some things that the design really benefited from was the removal of some retaining walls and the redesign using a sloped lawn, which actually resembles the existing sloped lawn. The reduction of guardrails, which also better maintains the views of the historic classical revival portico. Next slide, please. This is a night lighting perspective here. The design refinements included lighting revisions with more even and equitable distribution for the stairs and the ramped walkways alike. Next slide, please. Some of the revisions to the new building additions included the exterior cladding was changed from metal siding to brick, as well as the fenestration patterns of the new additions was revised to better reflect the historic building proportions and emphasize verticality. Next slide, please. Along the south historic wall and the walkway, there were also a number of real positive design attributes that came out of our interactions and reviews. The retention and rehabilitation of the historic south-facing wall, which with views out to the Buckman Field. The landscape design paving enhancements with pedestrian and bike promenade, which is a neighborhood connector between Northeast 12th and Northeast 15th. In addition, the new building is set back from the historic facade with a roof terrace that overlooks the field. Next slide, please. This is a view of the CTE courtyard, as we're calling it. This really helps to reinforce the campus significance. It reflects the historic campus layout by the removal of non-historically significant buildings, and it provides a safe and secure workspace for the career technical educational programs. This area also includes over 200 covered bike parking spots. The building entries and the landscape design was refined and improved to more clearly give pedestrian, bike, and the CTE teaching uses more emphasis and safety. The outdoor classroom and shop areas housed here that will be using this outdoor learning space include automotive, construction, math tech, and manufacturing. If you'd like any more information about this fantastic and interesting project, please check the PPS Benson Bond website. And if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Thank you, Jen. Next up, Geronimo. Welcome so much, Geronimo. I haven't seen you since last year, a long time ago.
Thank you for inviting me, Kristen. And thank you to Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners Hardesty, Maps, Rubio, and Ryan for the Landmarks Commission for this opportunity to speak about the state of historic preservation in Portland. My name is Geronimo Roldan, and I am a graduate student at the University of Oregon's Historic Preservation Program, which in non-pandemic times is based out of the White Stag building in the Skidmore Old Town Historic District. I've had a lifelong interest in the built environment and especially those places which we learn about ourselves and our communities. In 2012, I graduated from my undergraduate studies in architecture into a crisis job market, and I moved abroad to Colombia where I hold a dual citizenship and I worked as a licensed architect for 5 years. I worked for large construction companies, small offices, and on some of my own projects. And the biggest lesson I learned from this work and this experience was that the design and the architect's ideas are not the most important part of a project. And the real heart of construction is the way it employs the knowledge and techniques in the craftsmen and the communities where a building will live for many years after its completion. In 2019, my wife Diana and I moved to Portland when I was accepted to my graduate program. Upon moving here, we took a lot of walks around our neighborhood, and we found that we really loved the continued use of the older school buildings. As someone who grew up in the Midwest, I was witness to a rush to condemn, demolish, and sell off a lot of the land that public schools from the same era as Portland's public schools. As a student, I had the opportunity last year to do a remote internship with the City of San Francisco Planning Department's Citywide Historic Resource Survey. There, I took the opportunity of a remote internship to meet with a lot of the people involved with the administration of the Landmarks Business Program and the creation of cultural heritage districts. which underpin the Heritage Business nominations. With the knowledge I gained in San Francisco, I decided to write my thesis about intangible heritage conservation innovations around the United States and how this can inform the conservation practices in Latino communities here. By studying planning initiatives in cities like Tucson, San Francisco, and San Antonio, I hope to consider how historic preservation, which is traditionally intended for the conservation of architectural heritage, can be retooled for the preservation of those heritage practices which give meaning in our homes. After graduation, I hope to be able to stay in Portland and put down roots. My wife loves her job as a family engagement specialist with Latino Network, and together we are working to create spaces where traditional knowledge can be shared among people from across the Americas. However, most people from my program do not stay in Portland. There's little job market for heritage preservation professionals in the city sometimes, and a lot of my colleagues wind up moving abroad to Washington and California, where SEPA and CEQA laws combined with local tax incentives provide a demand for professionals from my field. If I could use my time here to advocate for one thing, it would be to consider the adoption of the Historic Resource Code and the adoption of local tax incentives for the protection of our cultural and architectural heritage to retain the motivated and inspired people who are eager to do their part in preserving Portland's diverse heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Clark Brockman.
Hello, I'm Clark Brockman, Principal at Sarah Architects. Thank you, Kristen, and the entire Landmarks Commission for inviting our testimony today, and thank you to the City Council for your interest in this important topic. My presentation will build on the important notion of embodied energy that Commissioner Smith discussed earlier regarding this reuse. So Sarah Architects in our over 50 years has had the pleasure and privilege to touch a bunch of existing buildings in Portland. And you can see there's a real spectrum of reuse, all the way from full-on historic preservation projects like the Pioneer Courthouse and your own City Hall, but also adaptive reuse projects like the Nines Hotel and the recently completed Henry Building, which is affordable housing now. There are also adaptive reuse projects, as Kristen mentioned, that aren't historic in nature, like we did with the Marriott Courtyard project, where we took a 30-year derelict office tower that had never been occupied and turned it into a hotel, and the Montgomery Park project, where we turned up basically a factory into an office building. And then finally, on the far right side, we have what we're calling deep retrofit projects like Edith Green, where it kept its use as a federal office building, but it was utterly transformed. Next slide. So just a little, we're going to review the transformation of that project. Next. Let's see if the video works. So we took off the heavy concrete facade. I'd like you to hold that thought. And then we put back a very high performance state-of-the-art facade on the project. We added solar panels, as you're all aware. And we then put shading devices on to further enhance the performance of that project. Next slide. So this reducing the weight on the outside is really an important concept for this project, but I think is relevant to other existing building reuses. We saved so much, there was so much weight involved with that we had almost no seismic upgrade required on a project that was built in 1972. Next. Next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Facing up.
Regarding the envelope, we talked about making it a high performance building. Those changes that we made the building perform 61% better than the existing building and 45% better than a code compliant building of the same period in 2010. Next slide. So recently we took to a study to get to Commissioner Smith's notion of embodied energy, and we analyzed what is the embodied carbon emissions avoided by this project versus building a very similar building on the exact same site if we had demolished the existing building one. Next. And the saving was a 53% avoidance of carbon emissions, all just by preserving the superstructure. We took everything else out of the building. As you saw, we took the whole skin off. The stairs were taken out inside. It was really gutted to its bones. And yet those bones retained 53% of the embodied carbon emissions. Next. And you might have seen that savings totals 8,600 tons of CO2. You might wonder what that is equal to. It's equal to about 1 million gallons of burned gasoline. It's not insignificant. Next slide. So we don't need to go into this graph in detail. I'd be happy to go over it at a different time because it's rather complex. The thing to note is all of our existing buildings in the city right now are effectively a sequestered mine of carbon that can be preserved or not. And every time we do a new building project, there is an embodied carbon debt that is effectively purchased by the city and by society. And every time we reuse a building, we can save 50% or more by reusing buildings, even with significant in-depth retrofits like Edith Green. Next slide. So in closing, I would just say that there's a big opportunity to the council and to the city in preserving existing buildings and finding a range of ways to do it. Everything from historic preservation, if you've heard so eloquently from other presenters, all the way to adaptive reuses and retrofits like Edith Green. And you should just be looking for policy approaches and ideas on how to mine that sequestered carbon that you have sitting in your city right now. Thank you. That's all.
Great. Thank you so much, Clark. And I'm stopping sharing. And I also wanted to apologize that it is just now turning 4:01. So we have taken up a lot of your time, City Council. But if there are any quick questions, we'd be delighted to answer them.
Yeah, first of all, don't worry. That was actually a fantastic presentation and we got a lot covered. This is what we're here for. And we appreciate the tremendous amount of work you've all put into this and the volunteer time that you put into this. This was great. Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty and Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you for that very informative presentation. And I'm giving apologies now, and I will probably have to leave before we vote to accept the report because I'm late for my 4 o'clock. But I had a question. One of the early presenters talked about we should incentivize preservation. And I want to know, what does that look like? Because I hear that a lot. Every time we tell people that we need to do better, it's always, yeah, let's incentivize it. So I just want an explanation of what does incentivization look like, especially if we are focused on trying to preserve the cultural history of folks whose history has not been preserved. So just want to know, what are we incentivizing and why?
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. I'll try to jump in on that quickly here. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that the typical way that the construction industry works, kind of led by developers and contractors, is a model that achieves that they look for great efficiency. And so it makes it really easy for them to kind of demolish things and then put up something that they already know how to build, right? So they want to start from kind of a clean slate, if you will. As a city, we know that there are many benefits to keeping the building, but we have to work within the industry to make that a viable path. So by incentives, I am talking about, perhaps that there are ways to reduce the financial impacts to these businesses to change the way that they do things. Perhaps, there are sort of training opportunities to get them to understand more how to renovate and work with the smaller horde of folks out there who are, working in glazing and window rebuilding. I mean, just the sort of smaller contractors. So that's part of the answer. I guess, Kim, perhaps you could jump in on the second half of Commissioner Hardesty's question. Thanks.
I'm sorry, but I have to interrupt you. But I'm really thinking about Mrs. G. Her house was nominated as a National Historic Landmark. And she had a 10-year kind of like tax abatement that was provided by, I think, the state of Oregon. And that allowed her to save money on taxes. And I think the whole idea is that if you save money on taxes, you can use that money to maintain the home. And you can request a second one. And when Miss Yee passed away and transferred the ownership to her niece received the benefit of that tax abatement. And there's other, financial benefits from having a commercial property as well on the, and also some of the local churches, when they are nominated, they can apply for National Trust grants for sacred places. So it provides some assistance to help maintain their historic features. Probably a better way of saying that.
I might also just add that carbon costs could factor into this. So really adding carbon accountability to that equation could help. Thank you.
Thank you. Both of those comments are really helpful. And as we become more aware of who we are talking about when we talk historic preservation, as we broaden that definition, I am very hopeful that collectively we will come up with a reparations approach to ensuring that whatever's left that preserves other people's history that aren't white Portlanders or white Oregonians, that we start prioritizing acknowledging that we should do some assessments about whether or not those buildings should have a historic designation. And there's not a lot of time for that. The other presentation that we heard was saying, well, gee, I hope, at some point we become attractive to investors again. I hope that doesn't happen for a couple of years. I hope we give Oregonians and Portlanders an opportunity to get corrected as we continue through this economic devastation, and that we're not putting all our eggs in the baskets we did previously, assuming that somehow big time developers were going to make us all better, because the results show that that has not worked ever in the city of Portland. So I am very grateful for your work. I will tell you, like I tell other people who give us reports, if you're asking a city council to do something that's in a report, that's not an official city council document. So other steps must be taken if you have a specific ask for us. So I appreciate the recommendations, but I just want to be clear, because I think a lot of people present to us their reports and our recommendations are in it, go do it, right? And then when we haven't done it next year, people are like, why didn't you do it? Well, because there was no official ask of the city council. So I love the work that you do. I think that we have a lot of beautiful buildings that deserve to be protected as we come out of this pandemic. So I'm happy. I'm looking forward to working with you all to make sure that we are intentional and not just talking about it. Thank you. And sorry, I do have to go.
Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the Portland Historic Landmark Commission for both this presentation and the important work you do. For those of you in the audience or watching at home, if you haven't had a chance to read this report but have some interest in the topic, I recommend it highly. It will teach you something important about our city, both its history and I think our future. I think I have a statement and then maybe a couple of nested questions. First, the statement, I just want to express my support and appreciation for your calls for the city to pursue an historic resource inventory. And I'm also very excited about your cultural heritage plan. African Americans have been living in Portland since at least the 1850s. And today, at least the last time I checked, I believe there are only 3 spaces on the National Historic Registry in Portland, which are there to recognize because of their connection to Black history. This concerns me an awful lot, especially because we're at a moment when especially as we grow more dense as a city, many of these historic spaces, I fear, will disappear in the next decade or so. So I think it's important work. I think it's important that we get that inventory done and that we get that cultural heritage plan together. And one of my concerns in particular, this is where the question comes in, is I'm particularly concerned about preserving Black churches. That's where you see a lot of Black history here in Portland. Many of these spaces are economically and structurally vulnerable. And they also kind of raise this dilemma. And I know some of you folks have been around for these debates before, but definitely over the last couple of years, I've heard a lot of concern about how do we both preserve these Black churches, but also help them retrofit for a potential earthquake, and sort of balancing the economic tensions there. And I know this is a complex topic, but I'd love to hear, and I know you touch on it a little bit in your report, but I'd love if someone is in a position to maybe articulate your best thinking about how this council should think about that particular dilemma. I sure would appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Mapps. I might call on Matthew to help me with this, but let me start just a little bit. Oh, Maya, were you hoping to jump in?
I was gonna chime in super quickly. I'm gonna go a little bit rogue, so apologies to my fellow commissioners and Hillary, but so Commissioner Smith and I were on the panel that the city created, which was a great idea. And of course it stopped because of the pandemic. And, you know, again, it's an extremely complex issue. And essentially it's just so much money associated with these. And one idea that came out at the end, and Commissioner Smith, chime in if I get any of this wrong, a lot of it was your idea, but the gist of it wouldn't it be great if the city, for example, could take some FEMA fund or some funding that's available, you know, for the disaster mitigation, and create teams of architects and engineers to send them in to help with these initial assessments. So the building owner, just the assessments cost a fortune to get engineers in there. So potentially we could start, for example, with the churches, sending in teams, helping the caretakers of these buildings at least understand what they need to do, which is step number one. And then we could worry about the funding as we sort of have the opportunity to delve more into how are we going to fund these things, which is the big complex issue, right? So anyway, that was one example that I thought was just a tiny little way of moving things forward. And it's sort of a win-win for everybody. It's giving money back to the local industry. It's helping the building owners. Commissioner Smith, did I catch all that? Was there anything else you wanted to?
No, I'm glad you brought it up, Maya. I will just add one thing, which is, for those of you who are familiar with the Energy Trust of Oregon, the ETO, they have a very, very good incentive program that was sort of the genesis of the thinking about this, which is, you know, they'll pay for you a couple $1,000s for you to have an eco charrette that lays out all of the alternatives so that everybody can kind of see the roadmap of what it is. So the thought was that if money could be doled out, if a few $1,000s for building owner or a church to get an assessment done, then they could really sort of wrap their arms around what they're dealing with. Because without that, it's just this daunting, nebulous thing that's out there. So I think in that sense, a little bit of money could go a long way towards helping a lot of building owners get a handle on the actual steps and some of the actual numbers.
Great, thank you very much. That's a great place for me to start. And again, thank you for your presentation and your important work.
Very good, excellent. I'll entertain a motion.
Sure, I'll go ahead and take that. I want to go ahead and move that we accept the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission's 2020 State of the City Preservation Report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Ryan, a second from Commissioner Mapps. Oh my goodness, it's been a long day. And with that, Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Thank you so much for this dialogue. That's what it felt like, which is always a better meeting than just a linear report. All of you had something important to say, and I really appreciate that you had people invited testimony, some award recipients, and it really brought home your presentation, having them included. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you just how proud I was that the work that you did to work with Darcel and getting the first LGBTQI historical presentation. I know friends around the country of mine in the well, I still say the queer community were just so delighted, and it was great to see you all advocate for that. And Kristen, I want to acknowledge your years of service. I really enjoyed our meeting earlier in the week, and once again, I'm just blown away with how many hours all of you put into this work, and it shows how much you love our city, and that deserves enough attention right there. Anyway, I vote aye.
Hardesty, Maps.
Again, I want to thank the commission and our presenters for just an excellent presentation today. I truly appreciate the work that you do to preserve our history for both ourselves and our children, which I think is even more important. I look forward to working with you in the future on following up on some of the initiatives that you laid out, especially around the cultural preservation piece of this important work. Those are some of the reasons why I'm delighted to vote aye.
Rubio.
Thank you so much for the presentation today. It was so informative and really interesting. Every time a commission comes before council, we get a glimpse of the many tables and communities of Portlanders that have been willing to volunteer their time to make this city innovative and equitable and responsive, especially in these times. And this is no different. In fact, this commission will engage in some of the most important decisions moving forward about resetting a cultural foundation of inclusion for Portland. And it was referenced earlier in your presentation, earlier this year, the installment of the York statue at Mount Tabor has elevated the issue about erasure and invisibility of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in history and in our city. And that has ripples of reactions, but most importantly, it's a reminder for us as council and also us in our work in our bureaus to take a deep look into the impact that our policies and procedures have in this cultural recognition or non-recognition, education, and then also amplification of these Portland stories that continue to be left out or have been left out of our cultural and historical narrative. So I'm very excited about the work that you're doing and the lenses that you're using. And I'm also really excited about learning more about the proposed cultural heritage plan and also being careful about what and who we're including when we talk about preservation. And also, Hidanimal, very interested in your work about cultural spaces in Latinx communities. I would love for my office to connect with you to learn more about that work in particular. But also just want to share congratulations to the award winners and to the commissioners. Thank you again for the hours and hours of wisdom that you contribute to our city. And I look forward to the work that this body will continue to do to increase representation, racial justice, and preservation justice as well. So I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I agree with everything my colleagues said wholeheartedly. And there's not much I can add to the statements they made, except to say just amen. I agree completely. And I want to thank you all for the time and the energy you put into this incredibly important work. And I get asked 1,000 ways to send every time I'm asked to speak to a group about what do you appreciate, what do you love most about the city of Portland? And I always start with its uniqueness, its neighborhoods, what makes it Portland as opposed to any other city. The built environment has a lot to do with that. Our history and our traditions and our culture are different and they're unique. And while we're in a time in history where we're holding all of it up to a bright light and asking ourselves what parts of our history are less than exemplary, and how do we learn from that history, and how do we move forward in meaningful ways, respecting everybody in our community. And as Commissioner Rubio said, these are really, it looks simple on paper, But when you get down to the brass tacks and you really have to wrestle with these issues and think about what is it that's unique and exciting about our community that's worth preserving, and what's unique about our community that maybe needs change. And you are one of those commissions that has as its intersect that discussion. And in your own way, you have to find the answers to those difficult questions that we're all trying hard to answer right now. Because as was noted, this isn't as much about the past as it is about the future and what we really want for our community going forward. And you're some of the brightest minds, the most innovative thinkers in our community. I'm not just saying it because I believe it. I'm also saying it because you're not getting paid. And I know you're doing it because you care and you're passionate about it. I hope you all knew you weren't getting paid. I hope I didn't just make news. At any rate, I'm just really grateful. I thought this was an interesting presentation, absolutely worthwhile. I'm appreciative of the fact you took time out of your busy day to all be here and give us this enlightenment. And I know a lot of people, believe it or not, do watch this on cable TV and online and elsewhere. And I'm sure they're going to find it enlightening as well and worth a watch or worth a listen. So thank you for putting so much effort into this presentation. Commissioner Ryan, thanks again for two really great presentations today. To Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Mapps, thank you for all of your work and your insights on this. This is, I think, time extremely well spent. Thank you all. I vote aye, and the report is accepted, and we'll look forward to more great things in the future. And colleagues, unless I've really screwed up, I think that's it for our agenda this afternoon, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.